My name is Myra Goodwin, and I'm 32 years old. 3 years ago, my father looked straight at my pregnant younger sister and said 6 words that shattered everything we thought family meant. You are no child of mine. My mother silently opened the front door and pointed toward the driveway. And I stood frozen in the hallway as my 23-year-old sister walked out into the storm carrying nothing except a backpack and a blurry ultrasound picture. That same night, I brought her home with me. For the next 3 years, I worked exhausting double shifts, rocked a crying baby at 2 in the morning, and watched my sister slowly rebuild a life that had been torn apart overnight. During all that time, our parents never called. Not once. But what happened at my nephew's 3rd birthday party, and the truth my parents uncovered about the child's father, changed our family forever in a way nobody could have predicted. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, a place where families are pushed to their limits and ordinary people discover strength they never knew they had. If you're new here, this channel shares emotional family dramas about betrayal, resilience, forgiveness, and survival. Leave your thoughts in the comments as the story unfolds, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode. Josie called me at 11:14 on a Wednesday night. Rain pounded against the windows of my apartment while thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. Her voice on the phone came in fragments, interrupted by weak signal and heavy sobs. The kind of crying that sounds painful to breathe through. Before she even finished speaking, I was already unlocking my front door. She stood outside completely drenched, clutching a backpack in one hand and an ultrasound image in the other. Dark mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her eyes looked hollow, like someone had erased the ground beneath her feet. I did not ask questions. I wrapped her in a towel, led her inside, and turned on the kettle for tea. Some moments do not need explanations. They need safety, warmth, and a door that locks behind you. Josie lowered herself onto my old couch and stared at the ultrasound photo resting against her knee. Her fingers trembled. Dad said I'm not his daughter anymore, she whispered. Mom told me to leave. I looked at my little sister, 23 years old, 4 months pregnant, soaked from the rain, sitting in a tiny apartment holding a grainy black and white picture of a baby not even born yet. I had seen our parents act strict before. I had seen them punish bad grades, missed curfews, and every impulsive decision Josie ever made. But I had never imagined they could abandon their own child. You're staying here, I told her firmly. That was not a suggestion. She nodded quietly. No thank you. No apology. None was necessary. We were sisters. And when everything around you is burning down, sisters do not keep score. What I did not understand yet was that Josie's silence about the baby's father was hiding a truth powerful enough to bring our parents to their knees. And she still had not told me the worst part. The Goodwin family carried a spotless reputation in our town, and my mother protected that reputation like it was sacred treasure. Every Sunday for over 2 decades, we sat in the same row at Grace Fellowship Church. My father, Frank Goodwin, served as one of the church deacons. My mother, Deborah, organized women's events, charity dinners, and community fundraisers. We delivered homemade meals after funerals, attended every church picnic, and smiled through every gathering like the perfect family. At the center of the church stood Pastor Greg Harmon, a respected man in his 60s with silver hair, calm authority, and a reputation that seemed untouchable. For 25 years, the town treated his words like absolute truth. His son, Ethan Harmon, was admired by nearly everyone. Intelligent, disciplined, polite, the kind of young man parents used as an example for their own children. He studied engineering overseas and seemed destined for a flawless future. Then there was us. I was the dependable daughter. Responsible job. Organized life. Quiet personality. The kind of person people forget is carrying problems because she never complains out loud. Josie was different. She was spontaneous, emotional, artistic, and impossible to fit into neat little boxes. She laughed loudly, changed plans constantly, and chased feelings instead of approval. Our mother often called her the difficult one, though never directly to her face. In our house, one rule mattered more than honesty, kindness, or understanding. Protect the image at all costs. My mother had a favorite saying whenever emotions became inconvenient, whenever someone spoke too loudly, cried too openly, or challenged the version of reality she preferred. People are always watching, Myra. To her, appearances mattered more than truth. What none of us realized at the time was that Josie had been hiding a relationship for over a year. Not because she was ashamed of the man she loved, but because revealing his identity would have detonated our family long before the pregnancy ever did. Everything collapsed during Sunday dinner, 2 weeks before Josie arrived at my apartment in the rain. The entire family was there. My father, Frank, sat at the head of the table carving roast beef with the same rigid precision he brought to every part of life. My mother, Deborah, arranged napkins and corrected invisible imperfections around the dining room. Aunt Carol and Uncle Pete filled the corners of the room with forced smiles and sweet tea. I noticed Josie's hands trembling before she even spoke. She slowly set down her fork. I need to tell everyone something. The room fell silent so quickly I could hear the ticking clock in the kitchen. Josie swallowed hard. I'm pregnant. My father exploded to his feet so violently his chair slammed backward into the wall. His face darkened with fury. You are no child of mine. No hesitation. No concern. No, are you okay? No, who's the father? Just instant rejection. My mother's reaction came slower, colder, and somehow far crueler. She carefully folded her napkin beside her plate. Then she stood, walked calmly to the front door, opened it, and pointed outside. Leave. Josie looked at me in disbelief. I looked at my mother. Mom, she's your daughter. Not anymore. Across the table, Aunt Carol leaned toward Uncle Pete, already whispering behind her hand. I could practically see the gossip forming in her mind before Josie had even stood up. Then my mother did something I still cannot think about without feeling sick. She reached across the table and removed the pearl earrings from Josie's ears, heirlooms passed down through generations of Goodwin women. These belong to women who respect this family, she said coldly. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I grabbed my coat. I grabbed my sister. And we walked out together. The casserole dish still sat untouched on the kitchen counter, perfectly arranged for guests, while the family itself shattered around it. At the time, I did not understand that leaving that house beside Josie would become the last conversation I had with my parents for nearly 2 years. The next morning, my mother called at exactly 7:15. Her tone was controlled and rehearsed, the way people sound when they believe they are morally superior. Bring your sister back so she can apologize, she said. Then we can discuss this properly. I stood in my tiny kitchen stirring oatmeal while Josie slept on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. She has nothing to apologize for, I replied. A long silence followed. Then my mother spoke again, quieter this time. If you choose her over this family, do not expect help from us again. No financial support. No holidays. Nothing. I stared out the kitchen window. Then we'll manage without it. I hung up before she could answer. A few minutes later, I sat at the table with my banking app open on my phone. $14,000. That was all I had between us and complete disaster. I started calculating everything in my head: rent, groceries, doctor visits, vitamins, baby supplies, utilities. If we stretched every dollar carefully, maybe we could survive 8 months. 9 if nothing went wrong. That same afternoon, I called my supervisor at the hospital and volunteered for extra shifts, nights, weekends, whatever they needed. She agreed immediately without asking questions. Good people recognize desperation without needing details. Later that evening, my father finally texted me. "Talk some sense into your sister." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "Talk some sense into your wife." He never answered. Not that night. Not ever again. I remember sitting alone on my bed afterward, staring at the ceiling while exhaustion pressed down on me from every direction. My savings were shrinking. My work hours were doubling. The little free time I had left was disappearing completely. And the sister sleeping on my couch still had not told me who the baby's father was. But the truth was, I was never the one forcing a choice between family members. My parents had already done that. I was simply the only person unwilling to pretend they were right. The first few months settled into a difficult kind of silence. Josie survived morning sickness with crackers beside the couch and ginger tea balanced on the coffee table. I survived on caffeine and 4 hours of sleep between hospital shifts. We avoided certain subjects completely. We did not discuss our parents. We did not discuss the baby's father. Instead, we talked about grocery budgets, doctor appointments, second-hand cribs, and whether generic prenatal vitamins worked as well as the expensive ones. Meanwhile, the town filled the silence for us. One Thursday afternoon, I saw Margaret Patterson at the grocery store. She had attended Grace Fellowship for decades and had known our family since childhood. The moment she noticed Josie's pregnant stomach from halfway down the aisle, her expression changed. Without saying a word, she turned her shopping cart around and walked the other direction. 2 weeks later, Aunt Carol arrived at my apartment carrying a white ceramic casserole dish with a chipped edge, my mother's favorite one. "From your mother," she announced softly. "She still cares about you girls." Inside was tuna casserole seasoned with the exact amount of dill my mother always used and absolutely none of the compassion we actually needed. Aunt Carol stayed for nearly an hour. She complimented my curtains. She asked how Josie was feeling. Then she carefully circled toward the real reason for her visit. "Is the baby's father involved at all?" I kept my answers short. "Josie's resting. We're managing. We don't need anything." When I walked her to the door, I already knew exactly what would happen next. By evening, every detail had traveled back through the family gossip chain. Josie was visibly pregnant. No wedding ring. No man around. And my mother's response eventually drifted back to us through relatives and church friends. She made her choices. I placed the casserole in the refrigerator after Aunt Carol left. I never ate a single bite. But I never threw it away immediately either. For 9 days, it sat untouched on the middle shelf like some strange monument to conditional love before I finally scraped it into the trash. What Aunt Carol never reported, because she never thought to ask, was the identity of the baby's father. If she had known, the entire town would have exploded much sooner. A few weeks later, I learned about the sermon. The news came from Dr. Patrice Coleman, one of the few people at the hospital I genuinely trusted. Patrice was older than me, calm under pressure, and wise enough to stay out of gossip unless silence became harmful. She found me alone in the break room one Monday morning and quietly shut the door behind her. "You deserve to know what happened at church yesterday," she said. Pastor Greg Harmon had delivered what members of Grace Fellowship later called a message about accountability. According to Patrice, he never mentioned Josie by name. He did not need to. Everyone in that sanctuary understood exactly who he meant. When a young woman abandons the values her family raised her with, Pastor Harmon had said from the pulpit, the damage spreads far beyond one generation. My mother sat in the front pew nodding proudly the entire time. Patrice told me she was the only person who stood up and walked out before the sermon ended. I listened quietly without interrupting. I did not cry. I did not call the church. I did not send angry messages or demand apologies. Instead, I walked out to my car in the hospital parking lot, gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt, and sat there in silence trying to keep my anger from swallowing me whole. Then I went back inside and finished my shift. That evening, I picked up Josie's phone from the coffee table to plug it into the charger while she slept. The screen lit up briefly with a message notification. The contact name was saved as only a single letter. E. I caught only part of the message before the screen locked again. I think about him every day. I immediately set the phone back down. I never unlocked it. But I stored that single letter away in the back of my mind beside every other unanswered question. Before leaving the break room earlier, Patrice had said something else I could not stop thinking about. Greg Harmon has spent 25 years judging other people's families, she murmured. Makes you wonder what's happening inside his own. At the time, I did not fully understand what she meant. Later, I would. By the time Josie reached 32 weeks, things became dangerous. I came home after a long Saturday shift and found her sitting on the bathroom floor gripping the sink with both hands. Her face looked flushed. Her breathing was uneven. I checked her pulse once. Then again. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. I was not an obstetric specialist, but I knew enough to recognize when something could become life-threatening. At 8 months pregnant, numbers like that mean one thing. Go to the hospital immediately. The drive to the emergency room took 12 minutes. Josie held the dashboard the entire way while rain hammered against the windshield. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the wipers scraping across glass and the clicking turn signal at intersections. Doctors stabilized her within a couple of hours. The diagnosis was gestational hypertension, not severe enough yet to become full preeclampsia, but close enough to terrify everyone involved. The instructions were strict. Complete bed rest. Weekly monitoring. No more shifts at the diner where Josie had been working part-time. Which meant the reality we had been avoiding finally arrived. I was now carrying everything alone. One income. No backup plan. No family support. No miracle rescue coming through the front door with sympathy hidden inside a casserole dish. That night, while Josie slept in her hospital room, I sat alone in the hallway outside and opened my phone. For several minutes, I stared at the screen trying to decide whether sending the message was a mistake before I even typed it. Finally, I wrote. Josie is in the hospital. Blood pressure complications. Then I pressed send. The message showed as read at 9:41 p.m. I watched the tiny red notification appear beneath the text. And then, nothing. No reply. No questions. No concern. Not even a single word. I kept staring at the screen for almost 5 minutes, unable to fully process it. My mother had just read that her pregnant daughter was hospitalized, and she deliberately chose silence. That was the moment I finally understood something painful. Some people would rather protect their pride than protect their children. 6 weeks later, Micah James Goodwin entered the world on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Healthy lungs. Thick curly brown hair that clearly did not come from our side of the family. Josie held him against her chest and cried softly. Not out of fear this time, but relief. The kind of tears that come after carrying terror inside your body for far too long. I stood beside her hospital bed watching my little sister become a mother in a room that felt painfully empty. No grandparents waiting outside. No flowers. No balloons. No proud father pacing the hallway. Just me. A nurse handed me paperwork a little while later and paused at the emergency contact section. Who else should we list besides you? Just me, I answered. She glanced up briefly but did not ask questions. She simply wrote my name on both lines. Dr. Patrice Coleman stopped by after finishing her shift carrying a small stuffed bear from the hospital gift shop downstairs. She held Micah carefully for a few minutes and smiled. "He's got strong hands," she said. "Strong grip." Later that afternoon, I wandered into the gift shop myself and bought the softest baby blanket I could find. Yellow. $12. It was not expensive, but it became one of the most important purchases I had ever made because it was the very first thing I bought for my nephew. That night, Josie rested against the hospital pillows while Micah slept peacefully on her chest. She looked over at me with tired eyes. "I'm sorry he doesn't have more people," she whispered. I pulled my chair closer beside her bed. "He has us," I said. "That's enough." A few moments later, she asked quietly, "Please don't post pictures online." I looked at her carefully. "I don't want them to know," she added. The way she said them made something click inside my mind. She was not only hiding from our parents. There was somebody else she desperately did not want finding out about Micah. Someone specific. The first year of Micah's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, formula bottles, laundry piles, and tiny beautiful moments that somehow made the exhaustion worth it. At 8 weeks old, Micah smiled for the first time. A crooked little grin that made Josie laugh so hard she nearly dropped her coffee mug. His first tooth appeared at 5 months. And his first word was my, his toddler version of Myra. I cried alone in the kitchen after hearing it for the first time. I am not even embarrassed to admit that. Meanwhile, life slowly kept moving forward. Josie passed her CNA certification exam in the spring and found part-time work at Meadowbrook Care Center on the east side of town. We handled parenting responsibilities like a constantly shifting schedule nobody had properly written down. I covered mornings. She covered evenings. Weekends depended entirely on who was less exhausted, which honestly meant neither of us. In September, my supervisor at the hospital offered me a promotion at a larger medical facility about 90 minutes away. Better salary. Better position. Better future. The only problem was that accepting it would mean leaving Josie and Micah behind. So I turned it down. A few weeks later, a coworker named Derek asked me out to dinner. I told him I did not have room in my life for anything else right now. He understood and never asked again. By December, my savings account had dropped from $14,000 to barely over $3,000. But somehow we were still surviving. Josie handled groceries. I covered rent and daycare. Utilities were split evenly. It was tight, exhausting, and fragile. But it worked. Thanksgiving that year was just the three of us. Josie cooked a small turkey while Micah sat in his high chair smearing sweet potatoes across his cheeks and laughing at absolutely nothing. It was the quietest Thanksgiving of my life. And somehow, also the warmest. Even after all that time, Josie still refused to tell me who Micah's father was. I never forced the conversation. But shortly after Micah's first birthday, I accidentally discovered something that changed everything. And once I saw it, I finally understood why Josie had been living in fear from the very beginning. The change began so quietly that I almost failed to notice it. People in town started speaking differently. Not dramatically. Not openly. But the tone had changed. At the hospital one afternoon, Mrs. Garza, one of my longtime patients, chatted with me while I worked through exercises on her shoulder. "I heard your sister works over at Meadowbrook now," she said casually. "My aunt lives there. She absolutely adores Josie." Then she hesitated before continuing. "Anne, I heard what happened with your family." I waited for the usual judgment that always followed those words. Instead, she lowered her voice. "For what it's worth, not everyone agrees with how your parents handled things." That was new. A week later, Dr. Patrice Coleman stopped me after a staff meeting. "The story's changing," she told me quietly. "What do you mean?" "People see you." She folded her arms. "They see you working overtime, Helping raise that little boy, holding your family together while your parents sit in church pretending none of this exists. She shook her head slightly. The numbers aren't adding up anymore. Later that same week, the barista at the coffee shop on Main Street handed me my drink and smiled. "Your sister is incredible with the residents at Meadowbrook," she said. "My grandmother asks for her every shift." Then she added softly, "Tell her thank you." I drove home replaying Patrice's words in my mind. Image only survives when nobody checks the facts. For the first time, cracks were forming in the version of the story my parents had spent years protecting. And they could feel it happening. At the hardware store, one of my father's old Rotary Club friends apparently slapped him on the back and asked cheerfully, "So how's your grandson doing, Frank?" According to someone who witnessed it, my father froze completely before changing the subject so aggressively he spent several minutes talking about weather patterns and lawn fertilizer. My mother had her own moment at a church potluck. A new couple had recently joined Grace Fellowship, and the wife, unaware of all the family drama, smiled warmly and asked, "Oh, I didn't realize you had 2 daughters. Where's the younger one?" I heard my mother's smile disappeared instantly. Like porcelain cracking under pressure. Not long after that, I crossed paths with Pastor Greg Harmon at the grocery store. We nodded politely at each other. No conversation. No acknowledgement of anything between us. But as he pushed his cart past mine, I noticed his hands trembling against the handle. At the time, I did not yet understand why. Micah was around 14 months old when I started noticing things I could no longer ignore. His curls had thickened into dark, springy rings that bounced when he ran across the living room. His face was changing too. His jawline was beginning to sharpen into something confident and defined, completely unlike anyone in the Goodwin family. We were pale-haired people with narrow features and softer faces. Josie and I both looked almost identical to our mother when we were younger. Micah looked like someone else entirely. Someone with dark curls. Someone unmistakably different. I kept those thoughts to myself. Josie would tell me when she was ready. At least, that is what I believed. Then came the phone. One evening while Josie bathed Micah upstairs, her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. The screen lit briefly. The contact name still appeared as only a single letter. E. Before the notification disappeared, I caught 6 words from the preview. "I think about him every day." I immediately turned the phone face down. I did not unlock it. I did not read further. But something heavy settled into my chest afterward. The next morning, Josie barely spoke during breakfast. She poured coffee silently while Micah stacked plastic blocks on the floor beside the table. Finally, she looked up at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." She stared down into her mug. "Do you think someone can truly love a person and still stay away from them because telling the truth would destroy their life?" I studied her face carefully. She was not asking out of curiosity. She was asking for reassurance. I answered slowly. "I think it depends on whose life they're protecting." She looked up. "The other person's," I continued softly, "or their own?" Josie said nothing after that. She simply picked Micah up from the floor and carried him quietly to his bedroom. The conversation never came up again. But 2 months later, I found the answer by accident. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in April. Josie was working. Micah was at daycare. I was folding laundry in her room when the drawer of her nightstand jammed halfway open. I tugged harder. Something slid loose beneath a pile of receipts and old papers. A folded letter. 3 pages. Handwritten in blue ink. Folded so many times the creases had nearly worn through the paper itself. The edges were softened from being handled over and over again. My hands started trembling before I even opened it. I knew I should put it back. I knew reading it would cross a line I could not uncross. I unfolded it anyway. The first two words made my stomach drop. Dear Ethan. And suddenly, everything shifted. I kept reading. Dear Ethan. I know you're still overseas, and I know your father told you not to contact me. I know you probably believe I moved on, the letter said. I didn't. I'm 17 weeks pregnant. And the baby is yours. I sank slowly onto the edge of Josie's bed. The room around me felt unnaturally quiet. In the next room, the washing machine continued its steady mechanical rhythm, completely unaware that my entire understanding of the last 2 years had just shattered. Ethan. Ethan Harmon. Pastor Greg Harmon's son. I kept reading. I'm not sending this because if you come home, your father will find out. And if he finds out, he'll destroy your future the same way my family destroyed mine. 3 handwritten pages. Blue ink worn thin from being unfolded and reread countless times. My sister had written the father of her child's name over and over again without ever mailing the letter. I carefully folded the pages back together and returned them exactly where I had found them. Then I sat there on the edge of her bed for a very long time, trying to process the truth. Eventually, one thought became painfully clear. This could not stay buried anymore. That night, after Micah had fallen asleep, I sat across from Josie at the kitchen table. The apartment was dim and quiet except for the ticking wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. 2 untouched cups of tea cooled between us. Finally, I spoke. I found the letter. Josie looked up. The one addressed to Ethan Harmon. The color vanished from her face instantly. For a moment she looked physically unable to breathe. Myra, I can explain. You don't need to explain, I said gently. You need to tell me the truth. And this time, she did. Everything. She and Ethan had been secretly together since her sophomore year of college. Not casual. Not temporary. Real. But they hid the relationship because both families would have opposed it immediately, though for very different reasons. According to Josie, Pastor Greg had disliked her from the beginning. She'll distract you, he apparently warned Ethan once. That girl isn't serious enough for the life you're building. Then Ethan received a prestigious engineering scholarship overseas and moved to Munich. Before leaving, he promised Josie they would make the distance work. But after he arrived in Germany, everything suddenly changed. Calls stopped. Messages disappeared. Josie thought he had abandoned her. What she later learned was far worse. Pastor Greg had intercepted everything. He went through Ethan's phone before the move, deleted Josie's contact information, replaced numbers, and convinced his son that Josie had already moved on with someone else. A perfectly controlled lie. Josie discovered she was pregnant 2 months after Ethan left the country. So why didn't you tell him? I asked quietly. She stared down at her hands. Because if Ethan knew, she whispered, he would have come home. And his father would have made him choose. Her voice cracked. And Ethan would have chosen me. I finally understood. Josie had spent nearly 2 years protecting Ethan's future while believing she was sacrificing her own. He would have lost everything, she said softly. His scholarship. His career. His relationship with his family. I looked at my sister in disbelief. For 18 months she had carried this secret alone while Ethan remained completely unaware he even had a child. Josie, I said carefully, he has a son. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I know. He deserves to know. I know. The words barely escaped her throat. I just didn't know how to fix it once so much time had passed. The folded letter sat between us under the kitchen light like evidence from a trial nobody had survived. That was the night I promised her I would find Ethan. And I meant it. The next morning, I started searching online. It did not take long. Ethan Harmon's professional profile appeared almost immediately. Structural engineer. Based in Munich. Recently active. And his profile photo stopped me cold. Dark curls. Strong jawline. It was Micah's face staring back at me 25 years older. I sent a short message. No emotion. No accusations. Ethan, this is Myra Goodwin, Josie's sister. There's something important you need to know. Please contact me. 3 days passed without a response. The message showed as read. Nothing else. I understood his hesitation. A message from an ex-girlfriend's sister after years of silence would make anyone cautious. So I sent one more line. It's about a child. He replied less than 2 hours later. What child? I called him that same night. And I told him everything. The pregnancy. The lies. Micah. The first birthday he had already missed. The son he never knew existed. For a long time, Ethan said absolutely nothing. All I could hear were distant traffic sounds somewhere outside his apartment in Germany. Finally, he spoke. I'm coming home. Your father doesn't know any of this, I warned him. I don't care what my father knows anymore. Ethan, I said carefully, once you come back, people here will talk. Everyone will find out. Good, he answered immediately. Then, just before we ended the call, he told me something that made my stomach turn cold. About 6 months after moving overseas, he had tried to reconnect with Josie. He called his father and asked for her new number. Pastor Greg told him she was already seeing someone else. My father lied to me, Ethan said quietly over the phone. Then, after a long silence. My father stole 2 years of my son's life before he was even born. 6 weeks later, I drove to the regional airport 45 minutes outside town to pick him up. Josie had planned to come with me at first. She changed clothes 3 different times that morning, paced the apartment for nearly an hour, and finally sat down on the bathroom floor fighting tears. I can't do this, she whispered. What if he hates me for hiding everything? I crouched beside her. He flew across an ocean to get here, I said gently. People don't do that when they hate someone. The drive back from the airport was quiet. Ethan sat in the passenger seat with his hands clasped tightly together, staring out at the familiar roads, churches, and endless green fields he had not seen in 2 years. He did not look like someone returning home. He looked like someone preparing for impact. Finally, he asked the question he had probably been holding in for the entire flight. What does he look like? I glanced at him briefly. He has your curls, I said. Your jaw too. Then I smiled faintly. And unfortunately, he inherited Josie's stubbornness. For the first time all afternoon, Ethan almost smiled. Almost. When we pulled into my apartment complex, Josie was already standing outside holding Micah on her hip. He was 20 months old. Tiny dinosaur shirt. Curly brown hair glowing in the late afternoon sunlight. Ethan stepped out of the car and froze. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Ethan slowly started walking toward them. At first carefully. Then faster. Micah stared curiously at the stranger approaching him, a stranger who somehow looked strangely familiar. Then, in the casual fearless way only toddlers can manage, he smiled and said, "Hi." Ethan dropped to his knees right there on the pavement. I watched tears hit the concrete before he even spoke. Josie knelt beside him, still holding Micah between them, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, the empty space surrounding all 3 of them finally closed. Like something unfinished had finally found its missing piece. I quietly stepped back inside the apartment and watched through the kitchen window instead. And yes, I cried. Quietly. That had become my role in life somehow. Hold the door open. Make space for everyone else. Then step aside. Later that evening, Josie retrieved the folded letter from her nightstand drawer. The same worn pages I had discovered months earlier. She handed them silently to Ethan. He read every word slowly. When he reached the final line, his voice broke. "I named him Micah," he read aloud. "Because I needed to believe someone was still watching over us." The months afterward were difficult in ways movies never show. Real life does not heal in a montage. Trust had to be rebuilt one conversation at a time. Ethan found work with a construction company south of town and rented a small apartment nearby. Close enough to be present. Far enough to acknowledge that healing and forgiveness were not the same thing. He and Josie started attending counseling together every Thursday evening while I watched Micah. Some nights they returned quiet and emotionally drained. Other nights they argued softly in the kitchen after Micah had fallen asleep. Josie struggled with the fact that Ethan had stopped trying to reach her after hearing his father's lies. Ethan struggled with the fact that Josie had kept their son hidden for nearly 2 years. And beneath all of it sat their shared anger toward Pastor Greg. But anger toward a parent is complicated. Part grief. Part loyalty. Part betrayal. It burns while somehow still keeping part of you warm. By the 3rd month, Micah started calling Ethan Daddy. That single word changed Ethan completely. He stood taller. Laughed easier. Showed up earlier. Stayed later. On the nights Josie attended nursing classes at the community college, Ethan handled bedtime with absolute military-level discipline. Bath at 7. Story at 7:30. Lights out by 8. No negotiation. Watching him learn fatherhood in real time felt strangely beautiful. Around the same time, I finally agreed to get coffee with Derek from the hospital. Just coffee. 35 quiet minutes at the cafe on Elm Street. It was the first thing I had done purely for myself in almost 2 years. One afternoon at a diner, Micah drew his very first family picture on the back of a paper placemat. 3 stick figures. One tall with messy hair labeled Myra. One with a ponytail labeled Mama. And one tiny figure wearing what looked suspiciously like a superhero cape labeled Micah. No grandparents. No church family. Just the people who had stayed. A week later, Aunt Carol spotted Josie and Ethan together at the grocery store. Josie never introduced him. She did not need to. According to Carol, one look at Ethan's dark curls beside Micah's matching ones told the entire story before anyone spoke a single word. Micah's 2nd birthday arrived quietly and perfectly. We decorated my apartment with cheap streamers and handmade paper dinosaurs taped crookedly to the walls. Josie baked a chocolate cake with bright blue frosting because Micah had recently decided blue was the only acceptable color in existence. The guest list was small. Dr. Patrice brought him a toy stethoscope. Garrett from Ethan's construction crew showed up with a plastic hard hat. 2 daycare families came with their children. It was simple. Loud. Messy. And real. Which meant, of course, it could not stay hidden forever. For the next hour and a half, my apartment sounded less like a home and more like a daycare fueled entirely by sugar and birthday cake. Children ran through the hallway wearing paper dinosaur hats. Wrapping paper covered the floor. Micah laughed so hard at one point he nearly fell backward off a chair. It was chaos. Beautiful, ordinary chaos. After the candles were blown out and the last guests drifted home, Ethan quietly disappeared into the kitchen for a moment. Then he returned holding a small ring box. He stopped in the doorway between the kitchen and living room and knelt down in front of Josie. The ring inside was simple, a thin silver band with a tiny sapphire set in the center. Not flashy. Not expensive. The kind of ring chosen carefully instead of carelessly. Ethan looked up at her with tears already gathering in his eyes. "I should have been here from the beginning," he said softly. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again. Josie said yes before he even fully finished asking. Dr. Patrice, standing beside me near the sink, leaned closer and whispered. You know you built this, right? I shook my head immediately. No, I said. Josie built it. I just kept the door open long enough for everyone to come back through it. Later that evening, after the decorations were half torn down and trash bags overflowed with wrapping paper, I noticed something taped to the refrigerator. Micah had drawn another family portrait. This one had 4 stick figures instead of 3. One tall figure had scribbled curly hair drawn in orange crayon. Underneath it, Micah had carefully written one word. Daddy. Still no grandparents. Just the people who stayed. For almost 2 years, I had lived waiting for the next disaster. The next phone call. The next betrayal. The next thing falling apart. But standing in that kitchen looking at Micah's drawing, I let myself wonder, for the very first time, if maybe the worst was finally behind us. I was wrong. 3 months before Micah's 3rd birthday, Aunt Carol called unexpectedly after nearly a year of silence. The moment I heard her voice, something in my stomach tightened. Honey, she said carefully, your parents miss you. No greeting. No apology. Just guilt wrapped neatly in concern. I leaned against the kitchen counter and stared out the window. They've had my number for 2 years, I replied. Carol sighed dramatically. Your mother cries every night, Myra. Your father barely sleeps. I closed my eyes for a moment. I'm sorry to hear that, I said evenly. But they've known where I live this entire time. There was a pause. Then Carol shifted toward the real reason for the call. Your mother heard Josie's doing well now, she said. And that she's with a nice young man. I waited. She wants to meet the little boy. There it was. Not. She wants to apologize. Not. She regrets what happened. Not even. She misses her daughters. She wanted access now that the story had become easier to explain publicly. If Mom wants to talk to us, I said calmly, she can call us herself. She's afraid you'll hang up. Then she understands exactly how Josie felt sitting in a hospital room after nobody answered her messages. That silenced Carol briefly. Then she finally admitted the truth. People at church keep asking questions, she muttered. Your father doesn't know what to say anymore when people ask about his grandson. I nearly laughed. Almost. Tell Dad he can use the same answer he used 3 years ago, I said. That she's no daughter of his. Carol ended the call not long afterward. I stood there afterward staring at my phone, realizing something important. Silence only works as punishment when the other person still craves your approval. My parents had spent years proving they did not care enough to reach out. Now the town's opinion had shifted, and suddenly they wanted their place back in the family portrait. I was not sure they deserved one. A week later, my mother appeared at my apartment without warning. She stood on the porch clutching a white ceramic casserole dish in both hands. Same chipped rim. Same careful presentation. For a moment, seeing her there almost hurt more than anger ever had. She looked older. Smaller somehow. Gray threaded through her hair, and her hands trembled slightly around the dish. For one brief honest second, I did not see the woman who had thrown her daughter out into the rain. I saw a frightened woman nearing 60 who had lost both her children and had no idea how to ask for them back. Then she spoke. I just want things to go back to normal, she said quietly. I want my girls back. I stared at her. Normal? I repeated. You mean the part where you threw your pregnant daughter out of your house during a storm? Pain flickered across her face. Your father and I were angry, she whispered. We said things we didn't mean. I folded my arms. No, I said softly. You said exactly what you meant. The problem is that now everyone else heard it too. You meant every word you said, I told my mother quietly. And then you sat in church while Pastor Harmon turned Josie into a warning story from the pulpit. My mother's jaw tightened immediately. Greg was trying to help, she snapped. He cares about this family. I stared at her for a long moment. No, I said carefully. Pastor Harmon cares about protecting himself. Something in my tone made her pause. And when you finally understand why, I continued, you're going to wish you came here a lot sooner. For the first time since arriving, uncertainty crossed her face. She did not understand what I meant yet, but the confidence underneath her anger shifted slightly. Without another word, she placed the casserole dish on my kitchen counter and walked out. I stood there staring at it after she left. Same chipped ceramic dish. Same performance of affection. Same shallow version of love that never seemed capable of surviving discomfort. Ethan confronted his father the following Tuesday. He drove directly to Grace Fellowship Church and walked into the office where Pastor Greg Harmon had spent 25 years counseling families and preaching morality. I was not there for the conversation. Later that night, Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table holding a glass of water he never once drank while he told me everything. I told him the truth, Ethan said. All of it. He explained how he and Josie had secretly dated through college. How Micah was his son. How the child Pastor Greg had publicly shamed for years was actually his own grandson. At first he just stared at me, Ethan said quietly. Like his brain couldn't process what I was saying. Then came anger. Pure, immediate anger. He stood up and pointed at me, Ethan continued. You should have told me. Ethan laughed bitterly. You made sure I couldn't. According to Ethan, Pastor Greg tried to defend himself immediately. I was protecting your future, he said. But Ethan did not back down. No, he answered. You were protecting your reputation. That sentence apparently silenced the room. Ethan said his father slowly sat back down behind the desk and stayed quiet for nearly a full minute. Then Pastor Greg leaned forward and asked the one question that revealed exactly what mattered most to him. If people find out about this, he whispered, it could destroy the church. Not. I have a grandson? Not. How is Josie? Not. How much have I missed? Only fear. Ethan stood up immediately. It's already out, Dad, he said. My son has been alive for over 2 years. He's a real child, not a scandal you can hide. Then Ethan walked out. No yelling. No dramatic ending. No begging for approval. Just the truth placed squarely in front of a man who had spent years manipulating everyone around him. That same evening, Pastor Greg called my mother. We only learned about the conversation because Ethan overheard pieces of it through the thin church office walls. The next morning, Josie sat at my kitchen table retelling everything she had heard. Greg called Mom furious, she explained. He said, your daughter dragged my son into this mess. I nearly choked on my coffee. Then Josie smiled for the first time during the story. Mom finally snapped. Apparently my mother, after spending years agreeing with every word Pastor Greg preached, finally pushed back. Excuse me, she reportedly fired back. Your son got my daughter pregnant. Pastor Greg blamed Josie again. My mother interrupted him. Don't you dare, she said. You stood in front of that church and shamed her while your own son was the father the entire time. According to Ethan, Pastor Greg tried defending himself. I didn't know, he argued. And my mother answered with the most honest thing she had apparently said in years. Neither did I, she snapped. Because you made sure they couldn't contact each other. When Josie finished recounting the story, silence settled across the kitchen. There was satisfaction in hearing my mother finally turn against Pastor Greg. But it was not clean satisfaction. It felt more like watching two people realize they had both helped destroy the same life. Neither one had innocent hands. And even after all of it, neither of them called Josie. Neither apologized. Neither admitted what they had done. Instead, my mother called my father and made a decision. We're going to Micah's birthday party. Micah's third birthday was only 5 weeks away. In over 2 years, my mother had never once spoken directly to Josie. She had never met her grandson. Never held him. Never acknowledged him publicly. And suddenly, now that the truth about Ethan had surfaced, she intended to walk into his birthday party pretending she had belonged there all along. I found out the next morning through a text from Aunt Carol. Your mother is so excited for the party. What should she bring? I stared at the message for hours before responding. Eventually, I skipped Carol entirely and called my mother directly. I heard you want to come to Micah's birthday, I said. He's my grandson, my mother answered immediately. The entitlement in her voice stunned me. I have every right to be there. I tightened my grip on the phone. No, I said calmly. You don't. You gave up any right to them, I said quietly, the moment you chose protecting your image over protecting your daughter. Silence answered me. I could hear my mother breathing softly on the other end of the line, waiting for me to soften the statement or take it back. I didn't. Over the years, I had learned something important. Most people fear silence because it forces them to sit alone with the truth. My mother was one of those people. Finally, I spoke again. If you come to the party, you come under our rules. Her voice came carefully now. What rules? You don't make the day about yourself. No dramatic crying. No speeches. No pretending the last 2.5 years never happened. She said nothing. And you do not bring Pastor Harmon. A longer silence this time. Then. Fine. One more thing, I added. Josie doesn't know yet that you asked to come. That caught her off guard. I'll tell her, I continued. And if she says no, then you stay home. I expected an argument. Guilt. Manipulation. Some version of. But we're family. Instead, after several seconds, my mother answered quietly. I understand. That evening, I told Josie everything. I made it clear the decision was entirely hers. Not mine. Not Ethan's. Not our parents'. For a long time, she said nothing at all. In the background, Micah could be heard pushing toy trucks across the kitchen floor making engine noises. Finally, Josie sighed softly. Let them come, she said. You're sure? Yes. Her voice hardened slightly. Let them see what they missed. When I told Ethan, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand across his face. My father's going to hear about this, he muttered. He'll probably show up too. Then let him, I replied. Ethan stared at me. You really want both sides of this disaster at a 3-year-old's birthday party? I glanced toward the refrigerator where Micah's latest family drawing still hung beside grocery lists and unpaid utility bills. For stick figures. No grandparents. Yeah, I said quietly. I do. Because for once, they were going to see the life that kept going without them. Micah's third birthday took place in the backyard of the small house I had bought 6 months earlier. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms. Chain-link fence. Tiny patch of grass barely large enough for a plastic slide and folding tables. But it was ours. That morning I spent hours taping streamers to fence posts and blowing up dinosaur balloons until my lungs hurt. Josie baked the cake herself. Chocolate again. Green frosting this year because Micah had apparently decided blue was no longer sophisticated enough for dinosaurs. Dr. Patrice arrived early carrying a wrapped present and sparkling cider. Garrett from Ethan's construction crew brought water balloons. A few daycare families showed up with their children, and by early afternoon the backyard sounded wonderfully chaotic. Children screaming. Plastic toys crashing together. Someone crying because another kid stole a cupcake. Real life. At exactly 2:20, a gray sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. My mother stepped out first. She wore a neatly pressed blouse buttoned all the way to the collar like she was attending church instead of a child's birthday party. And in her hands, of course, was the white ceramic casserole dish. Same chipped rim. Same careful performance. She carried it solemnly to the folding table and placed it beside bowls of chips, juice boxes, cupcakes, and bright orange cheese puffs. It looked absurd there. Like formal china at a playground picnic. My father stepped out behind her. He stayed near the edge of the yard with both hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets, scanning everything with the uneasy expression of someone realizing they no longer recognize the life they used to control. He looked at the small house. The decorations. The strangers filling the backyard. Then Micah ran over and grabbed my hand. "Auntie Myra," he asked loudly, "who are those people?" I looked down at him. "Those are your grandparents, sweetheart." He blinked once and looked back at them politely. "Oh." Then he immediately ran back toward the water balloons without another thought. I watched my mother's face carefully. That was the first real crack. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Pain. Because her grandson looked at her the same way he would look at strangers standing in line at the grocery store. Completely unfamiliar. Then Ethan arrived. He entered through the backyard gate carrying a wrapped gift under one arm. The second Micah spotted him, he exploded across the grass at full speed. "Daddy." Ethan barely had time to bend before Micah launched himself into his arms. Ethan caught him automatically, effortlessly, like muscle memory. Like a father who had been showing up every single day. My father stared at them in complete silence. The kind of stare people have when reality suddenly rearranges itself right in front of them. Finally, barely above a whisper, he said, "That's the Harmon boy." My mother froze beside the food table. The serving spoon in her hand stopped halfway over the casserole dish. "That's Pastor Harmon's son," my father continued, louder this time. The entire backyard suddenly felt still. Then realization hit both of them at once. Ethan Harmon. Pastor Greg Harmon's son. My father looked from Ethan, to Micah, to Josie. And finally said the words neither of my parents had understood for nearly 3 years. "Pastor Harmon's son is the father." "Yes," I said. The word landed heavy in the air. My mother's voice came out cracked, almost hollow. "How long has he been here?" I didn't look away from her. "A year," I said. "He came back a year ago. He is Micah's father. He has been Micah's father since before Josie ever walked out of your house in the rain." The yard went still. Not uncomfortable quiet. Something deeper. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone realizes they are no longer watching a private moment, they are witnessing history. My father stepped forward slightly, his voice unsteady. "The pastor's boy," he said, like the words were refusing to fully form. "That's the father?" "Yes," I replied. His breath caught at the end of it. My mother slowly lowered the serving spoon. It clinked softly against the edge of the casserole dish. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "We would have known. Someone would have told us." I finally looked at both of them fully. "Someone did tell you," I said. Josie stepped forward then, still holding Ethan's hand. Micah sat on Ethan's hip, completely unaware of the tension, focused only on frosting sticking to his fingers. "Mom." "Dad," Josie said quietly, "this is Ethan. Your grandson's father. The man you never let me introduce." My mother's face immediately shifted. Tears. It always started there. That familiar collapse of emotion she used like a shield when reality became too sharp to hold. I had no idea, she said quickly, voice trembling. If I had known who the father was. I cut her off gently but firmly. If you had known what? I asked. That he was acceptable? That his last name passed your test? That's not fair, Myra. Isn't it? I asked. Because you had the truth in front of you. Josie tried to give it to you at your own dinner table. And you didn't even let her finish a sentence. Josie's voice stayed steady. I came to you pregnant, she said. And you threw me out before I could explain anything. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. No words fit. My father tried instead, stepping forward with the voice he used in meetings when he wanted order restored. This changes things, he said firmly. We need to sit down as a family and talk properly. I looked at him. You said she was no daughter of yours, I replied. Silence. You stood up from that table, I continued, still calm, still measured, and told your pregnant daughter she didn't exist. His jaw tightened. Does knowing who the father is suddenly make her your daughter again? That stopped him completely. For once, there was no speech prepared for this moment. No scripture. No authority. Just air. My mother shifted quickly, reaching for the only role she had ever leaned on when cornered. Pain. Victimhood. You don't understand what it was like for us, she said. The church, the town, everyone was watching us. We were humiliated. Josie finally spoke, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through everything. You were humiliated, she said. I gave birth alone. My son didn't know he had grandparents until 10 minutes ago. She stepped closer. And you're talking to me about humiliation? A few feet away, Dr. Patrice had moved closer without saying a word. She wasn't intervening. She was witnessing. Garrett stood behind Ethan, arms folded. The daycare parents held their children a little tighter. The entire yard had become something my parents had always feared. An audience that could not be controlled. Then the gate opened again. A new presence entered. Pastor Greg Harmon. Navy blazer. Pressed khakis. The same polished expression he wore at community events, like he had just stepped out of a carefully rehearsed role. His eyes scanned the yard once. Streamers. Cake. Children. Then they landed on Ethan holding Micah. Something in his expression tightened immediately. Son, he said sharply. Let's go. This isn't the place. Ethan didn't move. This is exactly the place, he said. This is my son's birthday. He shifted Micah slightly on his hip. You're at your grandson's birthday party, Dad. Greg's eyes flicked toward my mother. Deborah, he said tightly, I told you this should have been handled privately. My mother didn't respond. She was still standing beside the untouched casserole dish, staring at it like it might explain something for her. The serving spoon remained exactly where she had left it. Frozen. Useless. I stepped forward. My voice stayed calm, almost clinical, the way I had learned to speak in rooms where emotion could cloud truth. You stood in a pulpit, I said, and preached about sin while your own son was in love with my sister. I paused. Then finished evenly. He just didn't feel safe enough to tell you. Greg's face tightened immediately. I did what I thought was right, he said. I let out a short breath. You did what was easy, I replied. The words stayed calm, but they landed hard. Shaming a 23-year-old girl from a pulpit is easy, I continued. Listening to your own son is hard. You chose easy. Greg's jaw clenched. And then you went further, I said. You deleted her number from his phone. You told him she had moved on. You lied to your own child to keep him away from mine. A shift moved through the yard at that moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just awareness. Margaret Harmon had followed him through the gate. She stood a few steps behind her husband, silent, watching. And for the first time, I saw it register on her face in real time. She hadn't known. Not the deleted number. Not the manipulation. Not the lie. She looked at Greg the way you look at a stranger wearing a familiar life. Greg turned abruptly and walked toward his car. He didn't say another word. Margaret didn't follow him. Instead, she walked straight toward Micah. She knelt down in the grass so she was at his level. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm your other grandmother." No one moved. No one interrupted. It just hung in the air. Like a truth finally spoken without permission. Then I spoke again, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "She wrote him a letter," I said. All eyes shifted toward me. 3 pages. Blue ink. "She wrote your grandson's name before he was even born." I paused. "While you were preaching consequences, she was trying to protect your son." That was when something subtle changed. Not the party itself. The structure of it. Greg's car started in the driveway and pulled away without ceremony. The daycare kids went back to screaming over water balloons. Someone restarted music from a phone speaker. And slowly, carefully, the backyard remembered it was supposed to be a birthday party. But nothing felt the same anymore. My mother stood near the food table. Her casserole dish still sat untouched beside half-eaten cupcakes and a bag of cheese puffs. Everything else had been shared. Hers had not. My father gently took her arm. "Let's go, Ma Deb," he said. She didn't move immediately. Her eyes stayed on Josie. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Can I hold him, just once?" Josie looked at me. I gave a small nod. Josie stepped forward and placed Micah into my mother's arms. Careful. Hesitant. Like handing something fragile to someone who had once broken it. At first, Micah stayed still. Then he shifted. Squirmed. Looked around. "Mommy," he said simply. Not dramatic. Not confused. Just preference. My mother's arms tightened slightly, then loosened. She handed him back almost immediately. Her eyes were red. "He has your father's eyes," she whispered. I corrected her gently. "He has Ethan's eyes." Silence again. Then she stepped back. My father guided her toward the car. He opened the door for her. She got in. They left without another word. The casserole dish remained on the table. Unclaimed. Unopened. Unneeded. After the car disappeared, Josie exhaled deeply for the first time in years. Ethan wrapped an arm around her. Micah smeared frosting across both their shirts like nothing in the world had changed. Dr. Patrice came up beside me and handed me a cup of sparkling cider. "You okay?" she asked. I watched the empty driveway for a moment. "I will be," I said. I didn't chase them. I didn't soften it. I didn't offer reconciliation. I let them go the same way they once let Josie go. Quietly. Completely. And without permission. 2 months later, life didn't explode. It settled. Not suddenly, but piece by piece. Josie and Ethan got married at the county courthouse on a Wednesday morning. No church. No audience. Just signatures, witnesses, and a child tugging at Ethan's sleeve. I stood beside Josie as her witness. Dr. Patrice brought champagne in a paper bag and a card that read, "About time." Micah tried to eat the pen used for the marriage license. Josie graduated from nursing school that spring with honors. I watched her walk across that stage knowing exactly what it cost her to get there. Not just money or time, but silence, survival, and choosing not to break when she was expected to. Ethan and Josie moved into a small apartment 10 minutes from me. Close enough that Micah could ride his tricycle over on weekends if the sidewalk behaved. Far enough that they could build something without anyone's shadow over it. My father sent a card. No call. No visit. Just a white envelope. Inside, thinking of you. Nothing else. I put it on the refrigerator next to the grocery list. And I didn't respond. My mother eventually left Grace Fellowship's women's ministry. My mother joined a different Bible study after that. It met at a small coffee shop across town, tucked between a florist and a dry cleaner. It was a subtle shift on paper. Whether it was genuine change or just a quieter stage of performance, I couldn't tell yet. Pastor Greg Harmon took a leave of absence shortly after. Officially, it was called a sabbatical. Nobody really believed that was the whole truth, but the church said it anyway, and the church often gets the benefit of carefully chosen language. Life kept moving regardless. Margaret Harmon started visiting Micah every other Saturday. She never mentioned her husband. Never justified him. Never defended him. Never dragged the past into the room. She would sit cross-legged on the living room floor and build block towers with Micah until he gleefully knocked them down, laughing like destruction was part of the game. On my refrigerator, Micah's drawings kept changing. Same family, still imperfectly drawn in crayon. Me. Josie. Ethan. Micah. And now a new figure had appeared in yellow. Josie noticed it first. "That's Grandma Margaret," she said simply when I asked. "No Deborah," I said. "No Frank." Josie didn't look away from the drawing. "Not yet," she said. A pause. "Maybe someday." I nodded. "Maybe," I agreed. "When they earn it." It was a quiet Saturday morning in late November when I found it. The house was still. Micah was with Josie. The kettle had just finished boiling, and the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from a candle I'd bought on a whim, one of those small, deliberate choices that feels like reclaiming something you didn't realize you'd lost. I opened the cabinet above the stove. The one I rarely used because it required standing on my toes and stretching farther than comfort allowed. Behind a half-empty box of expired tea bags sat the white ceramic casserole dish. The first one. The one that had arrived years ago carrying apology disguised as food. The one that had been passed between hands like it meant something when it didn't. I had kept it longer than I intended. Not out of sentiment. Out of inertia. I pulled it down slowly and turned it in my hands. The chipped rim caught the light. It looked smaller now. Not physically. Just emotionally. The way things do when the person who once gave them weight no longer has access to you. I didn't feel anger looking at it. Not anymore. Just distance. I placed it into the donation box by the front door. No ceremony. No hesitation. Just release. When I walked back into the kitchen, I noticed Micah's latest drawing on the fridge. 4 stick figures again. Plus a small yellow one off to the side. My figure had been drawn with an exaggerated smile and what might have been a cape or wings. It was hard to tell. Crayon always leaves room for interpretation. I laughed. Not the polite kind. Not the controlled kind. A real laugh. The kind that starts somewhere deep and surprises you on its way out. I leaned against the counter for a moment, still smiling, looking at all of it, the drawings, the quiet, the life that had been rebuilt without permission. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a savior. I was just a sister who stayed when it would have been easier not to. And somehow, that had been enough. People like to say families are defined by blood. But I learned something else. Families are defined by presence. By who shows up when it matters and who doesn't. Everything else, the apologies, the explanations, the late attempts at understanding, those are secondary. Showing up is the only part that can't be faked. My parents missed that part. And I made a promise to myself that I never would again. That was the story. 3 years of silence. One truth that finally broke it. And a birthday party where everything changed. If it reminded you of someone who showed up for you when it mattered, don't wait too long to tell them.